When I was working my way through college, I used to work nights at a gas station. I was pretty used to working nights, so this didn't bother me too much. The only uncomfortable thing was that this gas station was on the side of a hardly used highway in northern New York. That being said, my imagination would play tricks on me while I was working alone. The way the shifts worked was I was alone for the last 2 hours of my shift after the subway person had gone home. So for those 2 hours, I would try to pass the time by cleaning and listening to music. I didn't get many customers, but when I did, they were always just a bit off. Most notably was a man that used to come in every night and try to buy a Subway sandwich. He would always wait until right after Subway had closed for the night and would just stand there in front of the counter. I walked over and asked him what he would like, and he would say, "I'm hungry. I'd like a sandwich, please." I'd tell him that the Subway was closed, and he wouldn't react at all. He'd just stand there. He'd wait there, swaying back and forth for about 30 minutes. At that point, he would tell me to have a nice night, and he'd leave. I never once saw his car. He would just walk out the back and start walking down the highway. This wouldn't be odd if it was a rare occasion, but this happens every night that I work. I've tried asking the manager if anyone else had ever mentioned this guy, but she hadn't ever heard of the guy. I asked if I could get another person to close with me, but she said we didn't have enough staff to cover that. Plus, there weren't enough customers to justify the extra person. I tried to tell her that this guy made me super nervous, but she just told me to man up and try to deal with it the next time I saw him. That following day, I had to close again, and sure enough, I saw the man walk in. He walks up to the Subway counter and waits for an employee. I asked him what he wants, and he says the same thing as always, that he wants a sandwich. I decided I've had enough of this guy coming in and asking for this, so I decide to just give the guy a sandwich. He won't specify what he wants, so just pick something randomly off the menu. I tell him it's going to be $6 for the sandwich, but instead he just grabs a bag and runs away. As I'm leaving that night, I see the man in the tree line just waving at me. I got freaked out by this, but I waved back, hoping that he's just homeless and maybe it was the first nice thing someone's done to him all day. Or all year, really. I hopped in my car and I locked the doors, and I got the hell out of there. That was the last time I ever saw the man in the woods. And boy, was I grateful for it. A few years later, when I was doing research on true crime stories, I find out that the store I worked at, during its construction, one of the workers had been hurt when he was working alone. The store was supposed to open that following week, and there was a long weekend before that. This was before everybody had cell phones on them. The man's leg was broken after falling off the roof of the building. He lay there all weekend long and died due to exposure. When I said that this was in the middle of nowhere when I worked there, it was pretty much in the middle of the woods whenever he was on the ground, when it was being built. The story didn't resonate with me much until I saw the picture of the guy. He looked a hell of a lot like the man that had plagued my nights at the gas station. The worst part is, he's not even the worst one that came in. To answer some of your questions, I have never seen the man who wanted a sandwich in the store again after our last encounter. But that isn't important, because the next person I want to tell you about is even weirder than the last. This one still freaks me out to this day. So about once a week, there was this guy that would pull up to the pump and just lay on the horn until I came out. First time this happened, I almost called the cops. I just assumed the guy was drunk driving. My coworker shook it off and he told me that this was normal and to just turn the pump on and go out there and pump the gas for him. This was a bit odd because we just weren't a full-service gas station. I was new at the time, so I went out and I did as my coworker said. The man said he wanted 20 of the tank. The first thing that struck me as odd was he wouldn't look at me. He just stared down at the floor with his hood over his head. So I took the $20 bill he handed me and started pumping the gas. This was obviously a normal thing because my coworker had already turned the pump on. The guy did have good taste in music at least. He had it blaring, so that was a little annoying. I started pumping the gas, and when the song started to quiet down and start transitioning into the next song, I swore I could hear whimpering. My head perked up, and I tried to listen for the sound, but didn't have any luck. I finished pumping and hung the nozzle back up. As soon as I did that, the guy took off down the road. I just chalked it up to him being an asshole. My coworker said that he does that every time. I put the 20 in the register and finished up my night without any problems. The following week, when I was closing again, I saw the man pull up. He wailed on the horn again, and I walked over to the register and turned on the pump. I walked outside and he stopped honking. He said he wanted $20 and handed me the money. He still didn't make eye contact with me and had the music blaring again. This time as I was pumping the gas, I swore that I could hear the sound of yelling coming from somewhere. I stopped pumping and asked if he heard anything. The guy didn't even look at me. He just turned the music up and told me to hurry up. I quickly finished pumping the gas and he tore down the road again. I tried to push it out my mind, but what could I do? The guy was obviously unhinged. I didn't want to push him off and find myself in the back of that trunk. I promised myself, though, that if I saw him again, I'd call the cops and have someone check out the back of that car. The following week, I was all alone during the 2-hour period that I closed, and he pulled up. He lays on the horn like usual, so I ducked behind the counter and pulled up my phone to call the cops. I tell the dispatcher that I believe someone's in danger and where I was. She tells me a patrol car will be there as soon as it can. She asked me to give her the plate number, the vehicle, and so I slowly poke my head around the side of the counter and see if I can get a good look at the car. I saw that the guy was still staring at the floor of his car and just laying on the horn. I told her the plate number was, and she told me to sit tight until a patrol got there. I figured the guy would leave if I didn't go to the pump, so I went out and wanted to stall for time before the cops got there. He saw me step out, and he let off the horn. He motioned for me to hurry up, but I tried to walk as slow as I could to draw out the time. I finally got up to the window, and like always, he handed me the 20, and I started pumping. I pumped about $5 into the tank, and told him that the pump had shut off. I told him I needed to go back inside and reset the pump to get it to work. He shook his head, and I made my way back into the store. I had just turned on the pump when I saw a state trooper pull in. The man didn't even react to the trooper. He just kept his eyes on the floor. I could tell he still had the music blaring because it looked like the cop was yelling at him to turn it off. The man complied, and I could see the cop try to pull out his gun. The man was quicker than him, though, and shot him in the chest and knocked him to the ground. The man finally looked up at me through the glass windows. I've never seen so much rage in someone's face before. He looked at me for what felt like an hour, and then tore off down the road. I called 911 again and told them they had an officer down. Within minutes, the station was swarming with cops. I could see them going up and down the highway, looking for the car. I was questioned for about an hour following the incident, so they could get any info about the driver they could get. They didn't find the vehicle for a few weeks after the shooting. The car was out in the middle of the woods and had been burnt. Upon searching the wreckage, they found the body of a young woman that had been missing for about a week. There was apparently a string of disappearances over the last month, all young women. They didn't find the driver at the scene, and still haven't to this day. I worry every day that I'm going to be closing one night, and I'm going to hear the wailing of a horn from the pump. I really don't know why I keep this damn job. But as afraid as I am of these people, they fascinate me as well. Maybe I'll tell you about more of them in the future. Not all the customers that used to come in were bad. You'd have your regulars that were usually pretty nice. The regular I'm talking about was named Thomas. He would come in every Friday night and get himself a tall boy and a pizza for his kid. This was the only place for about 30 miles that sold pizza, so most of the locals just came here. My coworker said he'd been doing this for years. Always the same Bud Light tall boy and a pepperoni pizza. I didn't know this at the time, but Thomas had a wife and son. Thomas had a little movie night every Friday night with his wife and son, and that's what the pizza was for. They were his world, and he was theirs. For the next few weeks, I saw Thomas come in every Friday with a big smile on his face, tall boy in one hand, and his wallet to show me his ID in the other. He would ask for the pepperoni pizza he had ordered, and I would ring him up. He would thank me and wish me a happy weekend. Thomas had a kind of energy that would light up a room. The kind of energy that brightens everyone's day anywhere he goes. I loved it when Thomas would come in, because it would make closing on Friday nights bearable. The following Friday, I waited for Thomas to come in, but he just never did. He had broken his multi-year streak, and it set me on edge. I had only really seen him a few weeks in a row, but I was weirdly worried about the guy. I waited for a few more weeks, but didn't see Thomas. I figured he must have found a job somewhere else and had to move. It wasn't until a few months later that I finally saw Thomas again. But he wasn't the same happy-go-lucky man I'd seen last. Something was missing. Whatever light that had been in that man had been extinguished. This time he didn't just grab one tall boy. He grabbed a 30 rack and stumbled up to the counter. I couldn't tell if he was drunk or just hadn't slept in a while. When he walked to the counter, I got the confirmation. He didn't smell like booze, but he had huge bags under his eyes. I asked him if he forgot to order his pepperoni pizza, and he just broke down crying. I just let him cry for a little while. Then I asked him if he was all right. He didn't say anything else, just paid and left. It was a few more weeks before I saw Thomas again. This time he looked even worse than before. He still had large bags under his eyes, but as he walked with his 30 rack, I could smell the beer all over him. I had seen him drive in, so I didn't want him to get into an accident when he left. I felt like I had no other choice but to call the cops and have them take care of him. I know it wasn't the best way that he could have been handled, but I didn't want him plowing into someone else's car. I ended up telling Thomas that we couldn't accept payment right now, and that he'd need to wait a few minutes for our system to reboot. This was a pretty normal thing. It had happened to him a couple times before, so it didn't seem like it was anything out of the ordinary. He sat down in the subway dining room while he waited and cracked open one of the cans from the 30 rack he hadn't paid for yet. I let it go, and I just waited for the cops to show up. You could see the look of defeat in his eyes when the trooper pulled in. Thomas just sat there and waited for the trooper to come in. The trooper thanked me for giving him the call, and said Thomas hadn't been the same since the incident. He told Thomas to get in the car, and he would drive him home. The incident piqued my interest, though, and I decided to look into it. I scrolled through the articles until I came across a mother and son who had died in a tragic robbery gone wrong. Apparently, at some point before Thomas had made it home on Friday, a man had broken into his home and tried to rob the place. People assumed that Thomas's wife and son had been coming back from school when they walked into the house while the burglar was still inside. The burglar must have panicked and shot his wife and son. Thomas was the first person to find them. I welled up reading this and began to cry. Thinking of my wife and boys in a similar scenario was too much to think about. Thomas has since started to get his life together, but you can tell something's missing. A large piece of him died that day. It's a part he will never get back. He used to be able to fill a room with love, and now he's just an empty shell of a man, just going through the motions. I hope Thomas finds peace one day. I've always enjoyed working nights wherever I work. If I wasn't working somewhere at night, I would toil away working on some type of passion project in the middle of the night. This one night has changed the way I look at the night. It is no longer my place of solace, but something to be respected and sometimes feared. It all started in my first week closing by myself. I was still getting used to all the duties that I had to complete. Stocking the shelves, front-facing all the products, and restocking the cooler, along with all the cleaning that needed to be done. It all seemed a bit overwhelming for the one person to accomplish on their own. But I really needed this job, so I pushed forward. That's probably the reason I didn't notice them at first, when I was rolling some trash out of the back dumpster. There were two kids standing in front of the front door of the store. Both were not dressed for the weather at all. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but something seemed off about these two. It wasn't that weird to get teenagers out here in the middle of the night. Most were either trying to score a pack of smokes or try to buy a beer. This was met with a no on the night I worked, so they tended not to come in when they saw my truck out front. I hadn't seen these kids before, so I said hi and walked into the store. I figured they were building up the courage to come inside and buy beer. I stood at the counter expecting them to come inside, but they just stood at the front door. They had turned when I walked by and were faced toward the front of the store. They were staring at the ground. I didn't know what to make of this, and I figured I'd just go stock the coffee bar while I waited for them to do whatever they were going to do. After 15 minutes of this, I had had enough. I hadn't yet seen much of the horrors I'd seen now, so I assumed they were just kids messing around with the guys working at the gas station. I walked out front and asked if they needed any help. They just stared at the ground like I hadn't even said anything at all. I asked if they needed anything, and one of them said they were cold. I told them to come inside and warm up. I asked who their parents were, but they didn't say anything to that. I asked how they got here, and was met with more silence. This seemed like a good time to call the police. I started to walk back to the phone when all the lights went out of the building. I could hear the kids crying now, as I felt around my pockets for my cell phone. I finally managed to grab a hold of my phone and flick the light on when the crying stopped. I panned the light around and yelled for the kids. "Hey, where are you?" My heart skipped a beat when I spun the camera toward one of the entrances. Standing there was one of the kids, but they were finally looking forward. Its skin was pale white and its eyes were black as coal. It stared directly at me, smiling. I asked where its friend went, but it didn't answer. I heard laughing from the other entrance and saw the other child standing there. Same pale skin and coal black eyes, with a giant smile on its face like the other one. They both started to laugh in unison, and I didn't know what to do. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life. You always think you'll either be the fight or flight type of person. But what really happened was worse. I was paralyzed with fear, and their laughs bore into my mind. Their laugh was all I could hear, and it felt like I was starting to reach a breaking point. It felt like two stereo speakers blaring into my ears. After a moment, I broke free of the paralysis, aware of the danger I was in. I didn't know what these things had in mind for me, but I was sure it wasn't anything good. I didn't want to pin myself into a place I couldn't get out. That meant the back room, cooler, and storage area were no-go. That left me with staying here and trying to withstand the overwhelming laughter, or I could gather my courage and try to make a break for one of the entrances. Standing still didn't seem to be working, so I grabbed the closest fire extinguisher and decided that I was getting out of here whether they liked it or not. As soon as I picked up the extinguisher, the laughter ended. They just stared in silence now. Their eyes followed me everywhere I walked. I decided the front door was going to be my escape because my truck was closest to it. I walked toward the front door, and the smile on its face melted away, replaced by the terrified look of my manager. She asked me if I was okay, and I completely just broke down. She told me she realized that she didn't tell me about the backup generator we had in the back. It popped in her head because all the lights went out in town. She asked why I had the fire extinguisher in my hands. I tried to explain what I had just been through, but it all came out wrong and didn't make much sense. She figured my imagination just played tricks on me since I was stuck out here with no lights on for the past 2 hours. I told her it had been only like 15 minutes since the lights had gone out. She was pretty insistent that the lights had been out that long because that's how long she'd been trying to call the landline of the store. She said it looked a little too spooked and that she'd finished the last hour and close up. I didn't hesitate and I got in the truck and pulled away. As I was driving away though, I swear I saw the silhouette of 2 teenage kids in the rearview mirror waving at me. I almost didn't go back, but I really needed this job. After seeing all the encounters I've had over the years, you may wonder what it would take for me to quit. Between sadistic-looking children with black eyes, serial killers, and ghosts, you would think I'd quit. Well, I'll tell you exactly what it took for me to quit. There was this older woman that would come in most nights. She always seemed pleasant enough and would usually have something nice to say before she left. She'd grab a few things and leave without much of a fuss. This continued for some time, until one night. She had come up to the counter and was cashing out. She went to hand me her debit card when her hands brushed against mine by accident. It felt like I'd been struck by lightning, and I was hit with the most vivid image I've ever seen. It really felt like I was there. It was maybe only 10 seconds long, but it left an impression. The woman could see that something had changed in me, and asked what I saw. I looked at her confused, but decided to tell her anyway. I don't know, she just seemed like the kind of person I could trust. I told her that I'd seen my own death. She didn't even look shocked and asked if there was more to it. I told her that in the vision, I'd seen myself coming into work, and the man with the strange sounds coming from his trunk was there too. He had a huge smile on his face and was pointing a gun at me. I pleaded with him, but he just kept on smiling. He pulled the trigger, and the vision ends. She didn't say anything, and just stared at me for a minute. I figured she just thought I was nuts. She said one thing, and it was enough for me to leave and never come back. She said, "Leave this place now, or it will come to pass. This is not a vision, but a warning of things to come. If you don't leave now, he will be here soon, and the warning will be for nothing." After that, she turned and left. I tried to call her, but she never turned back around. I thought about it for a minute, and after everything I'd seen up to this point, this was it. I turned all the lights off and locked the doors. I needed this job, but it wouldn't matter if I was dead. I pushed the key through the mail slot, got my truck, and got the hell out of there. As I was driving away, I could see a car pulling into the gas station. I never saw who it was, but I always assumed it was the man from my vision. At least, that's what I tell myself to rationalize my decision. I'm still not sure if what I saw was real, but I know I didn't want to find out if it was. Thank you for listening to this. It was a lot more therapeutic than I thought it would be. I hope you enjoyed the story. That was the first multi-story story that I wrote myself, and other than a zombie story I wrote a while back. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to hear about alien zombies on Jupiter, click on this next video. I know you'll enjoy it. And remember to always face your fears.